What are triggers? Everyone seems to be talking about them these days. So, a trigger is essentially a stimulus that then creates this inward movement between thought and emotions, and then we think and we feel, and then we act. And triggers are usually spoken about in a more negative sense, where when we finally do react, we take that action, we make that behavior, it's destructive. Let's talk about some common examples of triggers, give you a better idea what we're talking about here. One really common trigger would be something like road rage, where you're driving in the car and somebody cuts you off, or they're not driving fast enough, or they're not driving slow enough, and it sends you into a rage. And you're flipping them off and you're swearing at them and giving them the evil eye. And everybody else around you is like, whoa, what's the big deal here? Calm down. You're just seething. That's a really common trigger. A lot of people either know someone or have experienced road rage. When it keeps happening over and over and over again, and all it takes is that little bit to set you off, that's a trigger. For some women, a trigger is seeing beautiful women on TV shows that they're watching with their partners. Another trigger could be something that your mom or your dad says to you over and over again that creates some really uncomfortable or painful emotions inside of you. It could be anger, it could be sadness, it could be frustration, it could be annoyance. For example, maybe you have a parent who is always making comments about your weight or your body, and then it causes that inner spiral of feeling ashamed, feeling guilty, feeling wrong, feeling ugly, feeling just somewhat worthless. That's a trigger. This example is not as common, but this is one I have personal experience with. I'll tell you guys one of my triggers. When I get very, very nervous, and I may not be consciously aware of why I'm nervous, but whenever I get really, really uncomfortable and nervous, sometimes I laugh. And it can happen in really, really moments where you shouldn't be laughing. For me, it's not that I'm laughing at the person or the situation. I'm laughing because of my emotions inside are so uncomfortable that it creates this outward behavior that is sometimes inappropriate. I must have been 8 or something like that, and I was out walking around with a friend by ourselves, a couple of 8-year-olds walking around some town we didn't know alone, and we got lost, and my friend started crying. What did I do? I started laughing, hysterically laughing. I don't know why I was laughing. The situation wasn't actually funny, and it certainly wasn't funny that my friend was sad or crying, but I just got so uncomfortable. As I got older, I learned that sometimes I have to explain myself to people that I'm sorry. I'm not laughing at what's happening here. The situation's not funny. I just laugh when I'm nervous. So sometimes emotions themselves, certain emotions with certain qualities to them, sometimes those things can be triggers. For example, PTSD, post traumatic stress syndrome, that trauma that whenever you're exposed to something similar activates that fight, flight, freeze response in your body. It could be a sound, it could be a certain graphic, an image, could be a person even that just looks like a person that you had a traumatic experience with. Or it could be a behavior that somebody does that reminds you of a traumatic experience that you had. PTSD, post traumatic stress syndrome, when those stimuluses occur that remind you of the traumatic experience, you're triggered. So let's talk about what are the actual steps involved? What's really going on underneath the surface when a person is being triggered so that we can understand how do we stop the triggering from happening. So the first thing, there's an interplay between your thoughts and your feelings. So triggers are very much an internal experience based on some external stimulus situation. So a lot of people will tell you that your thoughts can control your experience. And to an extent, that's true. But there's a lot of nuance to it that ends up making the distinction between people who are able to do it and people who aren't. So the first thing, that thought that occurs when that experience is happening, that very first thought, it's unconscious. You're not consciously aware of the thought happening. It's like that. It's like that. And it's based on an experience in the moment that brings up a certain feeling in you. So that feeling in you could be shame, it could be guilt, it could be sadness, it could be anger, anything like that. It could be anxiety, nervousness, some kind of feeling that is relevant to the moment. But then there is an association unconsciously, typically, that is made to a past experience with that feeling. So there's memory involved, and that memory could be conscious or unconscious to you. You may or may not be aware of what that memory is, but that's what lights it up and really sets the whole thing off. Like a fuse that's just been blown. So then you have a story. You have a story attached to it. So now you're not just in the moment, but now you're tied into the past. And now the whole thing is really going to get going. So this is where the conscious thought starts to come in. Now you have to choose. Are you going to continue the same old story and have the same experience, or are you going to do something different? Are you going to get a new perspective? Are you going to change how you see that experience? So after you have the unconscious thought and that momentary feeling, and then it gets linked to the past feelings, your personal history, then you have a conscious thought or an opportunity. What are you going to do? And it all happens very, very quickly. But that moment where you become conscious and aware of, oh, okay, I'm having this emotional experience inside myself, and it's really uncomfortable. And I'm feeling old, familiar feelings that I really don't like the feeling of. Now you have, this is your opportunity to make a decision. Are you going to continue what you've always done, or are you going to do something different? Now, sometimes these opportunities, these choices, they get away from us. Sometimes it happens so fast and it comes so unexpectedly that it's like we've already done the inappropriate behavior. We've already lashed out, or we've already laughed in a moment of discomfort, or we've already snapped at somebody, or we've already walked away and run away from somebody when that really wasn't the best way to handle the situation. And sometimes it's only in retrospect that we realize that situation got away from us. So as you become aware of what your triggers are, then you start practicing noticing when they happen. And then you can start to consciously say, okay, I know what this is. I've felt this before. I know I have a habit of, let's say you yell at your mom, when she says that thing that's really upsetting to you. And so you know that that's your pattern that you don't want to continue anymore. So you start practicing noticing just as that's about to happen. And when it happens, you step back and you say, I'm going to choose differently this time. It may take may take a few attempts before you actually are able to just stop the process and consider, how do I actually want to respond to this? So when you're doing this from a conscious mind kind of perspective, it's really helpful to make the decision beforehand. How are you going to respond when that old trigger comes up? So maybe you decide that, okay, the next time my mom uh, points out how chubby I'm getting, then I am going to say, yeah, I like the curves. And the guy I'm seeing happens to like those curves too. So, you know, I'm okay with it. It's just one example. That doesn't have to be how you respond. But by making the decision beforehand, you're more prepared to handle it as it occurs. Again, sometimes unexpected situations happen, and you just do the best that you can. And you learn from each situation as they occur. So that's how you can stop the triggers from happening from a conscious mind, conscious awareness kind of place. However, this is the good stuff, you guys. If you work with someone to change the root belief system, which is the unconscious part of that thought, which remember is how the whole thing gets started and set into motion. If you change the unconscious thought that is linked to those thoughts and feelings that you're consciously aware of, you can vastly speed up and change how you respond and experience those so-called triggers. So the triggers stop being triggers, they stop lighting the fuse, and instead you end up having more emotional balance and control, because it's the underlying belief system that drives the feelings and the emotion and the conscious thoughts. The difference between the trunk of the tree and the branches of the tree, which you can see, versus what's beneath the ground, the roots, but you can't see them. They are hidden from your conscious awareness. So by changing the actual belief system, the root belief system, then the thoughts and the feelings change without any conscious level exertion on your part. This is why so many people get stuck. They're trying to change things on a conscious level, want to have a new experience, but by doing it from their conscious mind, it's harder, it takes longer, because you're already about halfway through the process by the time you get to that conscious awareness. There's all that stuff that's happening rapid fire, the fuse is lit, but so much of it is unconscious. If you'd like to learn more about that unconscious part of the process, we can hop on a free strategy call. The link is below in the description. Don't give up. You do not have to be like this forever. I've got triggers. You've got triggers. We've all got triggers. But the more we resolve the triggers, the more freedom we have. And the more we're able to build our connections with other people. So, if loneliness is something that you're struggling with, work on those triggers. Then have a new experience. Beam me up. ah. Lemmy today must have been my lunch. Probably the dressing. Ugh. Let's try this again. So a trigger could be like a fuse that's been blown. It's the underlying belief system. Now you have to choose. Gosh, cloudy. Skip that. Cancel out. You see it differently. So it could be, oh, somebody's outside. Trigger. Trigger. Triggers. Trigger.